I keep seeing people treat everything Ralph says wow, just restart this. I keep seeing people say, ladies, gentlemen, and those with the good sense to do away with the whole notion, I welcome you to the premier audio medium for all your Fazbear entertainment needs, the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. Note, FFPP is not responsible for any loss of appetite, disinterest, dismemberment, or other legally classified statuses. So strap in and enjoy. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. I'm your host with the toast, RyeToast, here to talk about Five Nights at Freddy's, but not quite yet. I missed the 1 year anniversary of the podcast. Apparently, the first episode of this podcast was September 3rd. I forgot that I missed a couple weeks going through, so I'm like, oh, when we get to episode 52, that'll be a year. No, we missed a couple, but I figured the 50th episode near the anniversary is close enough to celebrate essentially 1 year of this podcast. Did I think it was going to last a full year? Honestly, not. I didn't think it was going to last more than a couple months, but people seem to enjoy it, and I like making it, so it's pretty straightforward that it's going to continue for a while. That being said, since it's kind of a celebratory mood, I kind of wanted to take today's episode and just answer questions and talk about theories. Totally not because I couldn't think of anything to talk about for today's episode, but, you know, I thought it was a good way to, celebrate that. I did this once before, I think on the 35th episode? 25th, maybe? One of the episodes I did doing this, and that was, y'all seem to really like that, to kind of go through this backlog. I want to be clear, when I did that episode, a couple people were like, hey, you said you answered every question in theory that have been sent in, and mine wasn't read. Two things. One, I haven't. I just made a bigger dent in my backlog than I thought I would. But two, I will say I don't answer every email sent into the podcast. For one, I don't read every single one because there's just too many. I try to, but you guys sent so many, and it's hard to keep up with. Thank you for that, by the way. But so for one, I don't get to all of them, but I also vet them for good conversation. If a question can be answered by a simple sentence, typically I'll either reply to that email or sometimes I'll just reply to that email and send that sentence over and be like, oh, this is the thing you're looking for. Or often I'll just be like, I don't have much to add to this and I'll move on. So if you've sent in an email and I've never talked about it, it's more than likely that I just didn't see it because it got swamped in the backlog. But two, it's also likely that I saw it and didn't have anything to add to that question, or I wasn't sure. So then I just didn't bring it up. But before we get into the questions, I kind of wanted to talk about, because this is the second to last September podcast. Because next week, actually, is this the last September podcast? It is, because next Tuesday is October 1st. October is going to be a big month for the channel, for me. And I kind of wanted to lay out that roadmap. I've teased it on streams, but I know only a fraction of you guys go to the streams, which everybody should go to twitch.tv/RyeToastYT. We stream at 9:30 p.m. EST Monday, Wednesday, Friday. You should check it out. Anyway, so I figured the podcast was kind of the perfect place to talk about it. Man, I need to get the brush. I need to. Hold on. I brushed him earlier today, so I didn't think it'd be that bad. But there's already 4 hairs stuck to the bottom of my nose. I literally shampooed you yesterday and today. I bought a new waterless cat shampoo because they just don't like going to the groomers. So I'm like, okay, if you guys don't like going to a strange place to get cleaned, I should find ways to clean you at home. And we're trying out the waterless shampoo to see if it makes a difference. I mean, worst case, I'll bathe him. You know, I don't want to because he hates it. And it's a whole ordeal to do. But I will if I gotta. So I figured I'd take today's episode and kind of go through the October roadmap. You can kind of see today's episode as the RyeToast Direct, I guess, for what's coming down the line. As far as main channel videos, not much content-wise is changing. I will say that. So don't think oh, we're fully rebranding to only cover Poppy Playtime. I want to cover more other games, but I'm trying to get myself out of the algorithm rut that I got myself into first.
But I think the biggest thing that's going to be changing in the beginning of October, October 5th, will be the first new video on RyeToast since February. I've been working in the background to edit my own second channel videos to make like 10 to 15 minute videos about Nintendo and Pokemon specifically. If you've watched any Pokemon content on YouTube, it's probably going to be similar to like your Loxton and Noggin, your Hoops and Hip Hop, your M&J TV, like that kind of, it's not going to be like Pokemon Let's Plays or Pokemon Challenges, but rather like Pokemon commentary videos, things like theories or rankings or what ifs and things like that. And news, of course, like if a new game gets announced, theories on that and things like that. It's going to be a lot more freeform. Like the main channel is essentially at this point FNAF theories, period. Not FNAF gameplay, not FNAF analysis, FNAF theory, and not other game theories for the most part. Whereas this will be Pokemon, comma, mostly. You know what I mean? But those, and I'm also experimenting with PNG tuber style on the second channel. It's something that I've been really interested in, especially since most of my colleagues in this space do that. I'm one of the very, very few webcam FNAF tubers. I think it's me, FNAF, Johnny Blocks. I know there's more, but I'm blanking right now. But I think like the TNT Muffin uses a webcam, I'm pretty sure. But like for the most part, especially in the FNAF theory space, it is PNG tubers. So it's been something I've been interested in trying. I don't want to try it on the main channel, at least not yet. I mean, if I see meteoric success on the second channel, we'll revisit that. But I like having the webcam, especially because, like, you know, the cats and all that. But it's something that I'm like, well, I'm already starting a second channel that won't affect the main channel's algorithm, so let's try out PNG tubing and see how it goes. So that's why I've commissioned those, and it's going to be Toast as the character. All right, you get your brush fix. Oh my goodness. So October 5th will be the beginning of weekly Saturday videos on the second channel about Pokemon and Nintendo in general. And there'll be a lot more freeform. I've made 2 so far. I'm trying to establish a backlog there, and I've really enjoyed the process of making them. It's really helped my, like, I wouldn't say I'm burnt out, but I could definitely feel like a FNAF burnout creeping up on me. So giving myself like a creative outlet that isn't connected to FNAF at all has been very healthy for my psyche. So even if the videos don't perform well, I'm probably going to keep making them. So expect those once a week on Saturdays. Speaking of Toast, the plushie, we hit our mark a couple weeks ago. And when I was doing the petition, they told me December 5th was the launch date for pre-orders. I was like, okay, cool. And then after the petition was over, they worked with their designers, and within a week, they sent a picture of the prototype for the plushie, and they were like, how's this? And I loved it. I was like, that's perfect. You guys kind of nailed that immediately. So they're sending me the prototype, and if it gets in my hands and I like it, the guy explained to me that December 5th was an estimate. We can go live whenever, as long as I approve the prototype. So that should be getting here soon, and once it gets here, I'm probably going to have the pre-orders go live sometime mid to late October as part of this whole like flourishing of these channels. So I guess get excited for that. I really like how it looked in the pictures. So we'll see when it gets here. As long as like the materials feel good and the designs are nice, then we'll probably go live with it very soon. So keep an eye out for that. Other things happening in October. I'm going to be trying to, pretty much every stream will be a horror game in some way. I know I kind of mix it up Monday and Wednesday and occasionally Friday as well, but I think October is going to be a good month to kind of try to introduce other horror to my community, because I feel like a lot of and there's nothing wrong with this, but I feel like a lot of FNAF fans haven't played a lot of other horror games. So I kind of wanted to try to broaden that reach for some of you who may have only played FNAF. That being said, we won't not be playing FNAF in October. Of course we will be playing FNAF in October. But I figured it'd be fun to kind of broaden that reach a little bit for you guys and be like, oh, you've never played Resident Evil Village, you know, or like you've never played Silent Hill, or like some of these classic horror games, or even like more contemporary ones. Well, like we did Mortuary's Assistant, but we didn't play a lot of other like newer, very frightening horror games. So get ready for a lot of spooky, scary nonsense, and FNAF peppered in as well. I'm also going to be trying to do a lot of collabs. There's one that I can't announce just yet, but I'm really, really excited for it. And it'll be the first stream in October. So get prepared for that. All I'll say is it's one of the biggest collabs I've ever kind of put together. And it involves a lot of FNAF tubers. So be excited for that. And then finally, I'm going to experiment with this mid to late, probably starting in October. I'm just a little scared too. So for anyone who doesn't know, for the like first 4 months of this year, I had been premiering all of my videos on the channel, like from March to June. March, April, May, June. Yeah, for 4 months I'd been premiering like every video because there was a program called YouTuber Partner Program that launched in January that essentially they would give you somebody who they said worked at YouTube to give us advice on our channels. So, and the guy said, something that'll really help your channels is to do a live stream and then premiere your video and redirect your live stream into the premiere. And it sounded like a good idea. I did it for 4 months and it cut my views in half. It put us in a really tricky spot because like this is my full-time job. So they basically took my income and cut it in half for 4 months. So I stopped doing that. And my channel is kind of back on the up and up. Things are back to normal. We're doing a lot better now. So I pretty much swore off premiering videos forever. And I recently have been in talks with someone at YouTube who kind of explained to me that like, hey, that partner manager program kind of flopped. YouTube corporate really liked the idea of it, but they didn't do it correctly. They just kind of like taught some third-party guys good YouTube practices and had them work for it. So it was a guy at YouTube who was like, hey, it was kind of a flop. Sorry about that. But here's some like actual meaningful advice. And I asked him, well, there's a feature where you can have a video go live just for members for a small amount of time and then launch it for everybody. Will that affect my algorithm if I do that? And he told me, because it's treated as an unlisted video, no. So I'm hesitant because I'm worried that it will. So I'm going to test it out in October because I feel like I don't provide enough value for my members. I really don't. I feel like I could be providing a lot more value for the membership because, right, I think doing the channel memberships on YouTube is kind of just a vanity metric for, hey, I want to support your channel. And that's awesome. And I appreciate that. Do not get me wrong. But I just wish I provided more for that without taking away something that I already give. Like I wouldn't want to change one of my 3 streams to a members only stream because then I would be taking away from the people who can't afford a membership. I would want to add something extra for the people who want to do that. So I think now that I have a backlog for the main channel established, I think I want to experiment with launching videos a day early for members. I'm just worried it will negatively affect my algorithm of my channel. And I don't know if it will or not. Because I was like, that put me in a really, the premieres put me in a really scary place. So I'm very, very hesitant to do it. But someone at YouTube, like directly at YouTube said, it should not affect my algorithm. So sometime in October, I will start doing that as well, where I'll be launching videos a day early for memberships. And full disclosure, if I see those videos perform negatively, I'm going to stop doing that immediately. I'm just going to be super real because I'm very, very hesitant to fuck up my algorithm just as I fixed it after the whole summer fiasco. So we'll see how it goes. Hopefully it doesn't affect it too much and I'll be able to provide something extra for you members because I really want to. But that's kind of the roadmap for my October for this channel. There's the RyeToast Direct for you. Enough about that stuff, let's actually talk about Five Nights at Freddy, shall we? So this is all going to be sent in questions and theories to the email. If you want your questions or theories talked about on the podcast, you can send them into Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast at gmail.com. That is in the description to copy and paste because it's a pain to type out. Our first question of the day comes from Rio, she, they. I was wondering what security breach ending you think is canon post-Scott interview. Did it change or further strengthen your initial theory? Thank you for your question. So before Ruin came out, I was pretty nailed in on Princess Quest, the good Vanny ending being the true canon one, especially with the trailers we got for Ruin. And then Ruin came out and I was hesitant because I thought that the Burn Trap ending was also canon. So I was like, what's going on here? But now that we've learned that Burn Trap was not supposed to move and the original vision Scott had for Security Breach, since he never told anybody, didn't quite reach what Security Breach ended up being, I think it's more, I think right now, Scott interview in mind, I think the good Vanny ending with Princess Quest is the canon ending to Security Breach. Now here's the problem with it. In that ending, Vanny is removed from Vanessa. Vanessa is freed of the Vanny persona. So how does that work? I think what makes the most sense, well, let me put it this way. I think no matter what, one of the Princess Quest endings, one of the Vanny endings is canon. It's either Princess Quest, good Vanny ending, or non-Princess Quest, bad Vanny ending. Where essentially, it's implied that Vanny is killed, but I could see her surviving that. And then, Gregory and Freddy's head get out of there. No, Freddy gets deactivated in Bad Vanny ending, don't they? Here's the thing. Gregory has to survive. The Pizzaplex can crumble from anything. And Vanny's persona is still alive and well, at least within the digital space. So the reason I think good Vanny ending is our most likely option, because Gregory and Freddy's head leave, and so does Vanessa. And yes, it's implied that Vanny is destroyed, but with stories like B7-2, I think it's pretty clear that these personas that are created by Glitchtrap the Mimic, what have you, in someone's mind can be separated from their original host. The idea of Vanny and Vanessa, Vanessa is freed from Vanny, but Vanny is still alive and well inside the digital space. That's why we see her in Princess Quest 4. So after post-Scott interview, I'm really nailed in on good Vanny ending, or I guess good Vanessa ending. I think that's the most likely ending for Security Breach. Now, whenever we see the follow-up post-Security Breach, I think that'll really nail home that and the Ruin ending. But since the next game is a prequel, we have to wait. But thank you for your question. Man, the fur in here is getting to me so bad. You can see my nose is red because I've made so many cuts because I'm just going trying to scratch it. Our next question comes from Archie, they, them. I keep seeing people treat everything Ralph says wow, just restart this. I keep seeing people treat everything Ralph says as 100% true, when I thought he was a pretty unreliable narrator. Specifically, I mean when he talks about the 87-bite victim and how he provoked the animatronics. Ralph starts the book as Fazbear's biggest bootlicker, and pinning the blame on Jeremy by saying he provoked the attack sounds exactly like what Fazbear wants people to think. I guess this isn't really a question, actually. #justice for Jeremy. I just don't want people to literally victim blame the guy. Actually, what do you think any differences would be if Jeremy actually somehow provoked the animatronics, rather than the old theory that he was just security guard shaped? I think that's a good point. I bring this up because there's a good conversation that needs to happen about the narration of the week before. In true Fazbear, in true FNAF franchise fashion, there is no reliable, fully reliable information in this book. Because it's through the lens of Ralph, an unreliable narrator, like you pointed out. Because Ralph gets a lot of things wrong in the week before. At one point he says, although you never brought Coppelia to work, especially not on Bring Your Child to Work Day. And then later on, there's a moment where he's like, oh yeah, she was terrified that one time you brought her. So it's okay, which is it? Now, that could be explained by he didn't bring her to work, but he did bring her to Freddy's while he wasn't working. That's possible. But Ralph is an unreliable narrator, and that is something that needs to be addressed. I actually bring that up in this week's theory when I'm talking about the year of FNAF 1, where like 1993, which is the year most people agree on, does still work with the theory I bring up if you're willing to excuse inaccuracy from Ralph, which I think makes sense, right? Because Ralph is like, oh yeah, that's from when I first recorded. That message is from so long ago. It was right after Coppelia was born, and she's 11. So it's like, okay, FNAF 1 takes place 11 years after this message. So the question then becomes, when was this message recorded? And if 1993 is the year, 11 years before that is 1982, which is technically before Freddy's is open, but Ralph is not like the most accurate person with the words he says. And also like a year or two after your 11-year-old child is born still counts as just after they were born. So it's something that does work based off of Ralph's inaccuracy. But you're right to point out that Ralph is an unreliable narrator. That being said, what difference would it be if Jeremy actually provoked the animatronics rather than the old theory that he was just security guard shaped? I think it gives credence to the Wizards being the culprits. A lot of people, and I didn't address it, so it's my fault, but a lot of people pointed out in my Bite of 87 theory that the Wizards were not allowed to roam around during the day, or the Wizards were in the back room during the day, whereas like it's stated that animatronics are no longer allowed to roam around during the day because of this. I kind of leaned on Jeremy provoking it as an excuse to remedy that issue, but I did not specifically bring it up, and that's my bad. That being like, oh, if Jeremy provoked it, assuming Jeremy is the bite victim, the idea would be like he goes into a back room and like he goes into the back room that the Wizards are in and like flashes a flashlight at Foxy or something, or does something to Foxy to get bit, right? And then Fazbear is like, oh, we can fix this, and makes a change that doesn't change anything, but does it to cover their ass. That was kind of my thinking there. But if Jeremy didn't provoke the attack, it does make it a bit harder for Withered Foxy to be the culprit, right? Unless it's the matter of like, oh, we need another piece for Mangle. You got it. Goes to the back room, goes to Withered Foxy to take a piece off, gets bit. Right? Like I could see that being the issue too. And then the whole idea is like he was just doing his job and got attacked for no reason, but then Fazbear can go, oh, well, he was taking a piece off of he was taking a piece off of Foxy. Foxy just attacked because he provoked him. You know, so like that also makes a lot of sense too. So there's a lot of ways you can go about this. But I don't think generally it changes too much whether or not Jeremy even did provoke an animatronic. But you raise a good point that's worth discussing, so thank you for your question. Our next question comes from Danny, they, them. So this is my first semester in college, and my new friend group hasn't been too caught up with FNAF lore. In a moment of boredom and the possibility of how funny this would be, I suggested I host a FNAF college lecture going over my interpretation of the lore. And that's where I come to you. How would you recommend starting to put together a timeline? This is a great question, and you have some more questions later on, but like this is a great question because this is different than what I've talked about before and like how I make a FNAF timeline. But that's not your question, because your question, and I don't even know if you realize this, your question specifically is, how do I explain the FNAF lore to somebody outside of the franchise, right? Because you're doing this college lecture of a timeline, and you need to keep in mind, if they're not too caught up on the FNAF lore, you have to start from ground zero. You have to start from the very base, and honestly, you shouldn't go too in depth. Something about explaining anything complex like Kingdom Hearts, FNAF lore, or like even taking it to the real world in like the sciences and mathematics and like art and music theory, like these very in-depth concepts, the reason they're college level is because people have spent 12 years of their life learning the basics, and now they get to the advanced stuff. Right? So if you're making this college lecture as like an introduction to FNAF lore and a timeline, you need to keep in mind that we do need to start at the basics. I think something that would be very useful, it is tempting to open with definitions and explanations. But I think something that would be more useful to your audience is to footnote explanations as they arise naturally, to not overwhelm them. I think if I were to make your college lecture here to explain the FNAF lore and the timeline, I would open by showing how vague and ambiguous the confirmed information we have is. So that way you can explain like, hey, I'm going to make a lot of assumptions and interpretations when I tell you this lore, but this is pretty much necessary to talk about this franchise. Like, open with that, make it very clear, like, this isn't confirmed. There will be confirmed things, and I think it's useful as you go to denote what information is directly confirmed, and then the rest of it being implied, like, oh, this is implied, this is a assumption, this is a connection I've made, versus here's the one sentence of confirmed lore we have for this section. That being said, as an introduction, I think it would be very useful to kind of do it into 2 chunks. Go through each game individually and talk about the lore that game presented. And then go into a timeline and bring up the games as they arise, as you think they do. Like, opening slide, hey, you have to make a lot of assumptions here. And then bring up like, oh, the purple guy is William Afton? That was only really confirmed by the 6th game. Something like that. Like, take something that they know that seems really common knowledge and explain how it's a theory. Like, start there to show how ambiguous this is. And then make your 10 or 15 slides about, like, FNAF 1 came out, this was the fan reception, this is the lore presented, some theories on the time, move on. Do that for all the games, and then move on to your timeline. Because a lot of people, I feel, try to teach people the FNAF lore who don't know, starting with the timeline. And I think that's a misstep, because I think it kind of forever will skew their perception of the games and where they lie. And it's very easy to lose somebody, especially since the first released game in the timeline happens like 30 years into the timeline, like 20 to 30, you know what I mean? Like, the idea of like the first confirmed game that we're pretty sure started this timeline that we know of is FNAF 2, which takes place in 1987. Meanwhile, Secret of the Mimic is teasing dates like 1979. So like, all the things that have to happen before FNAF 2, the fact that you have to start there can lose people who aren't familiar with what's going on. So I think starting with the games and then doing the timeline makes the most sense to me. But that would be my advice on how to make something like this. It sounds really fun. So I wish you the best in that. Our next one, not a FNAF theory, kind of refreshing. Again, you can ask any franchise, and I will occasionally talk about them. This one comes from Fawn, She, Her. Thank you for your question. Now, this is more of a theory review, but it seemed really interesting, and I wanted to bring it up. And hey, Mason, if this gets to you, is this on purpose? I know you mentioned wanting to do an Indigo Park video at some point, so I wanted to put my 2 silly cents on something. The interesting choices with coloring the mascots. It's hard not to look at the colors when the theme park is named after a color. One would think they'd capitalize on the color indigo since it's in the founder's name, but they really didn't. There does appear to be some theming. Indigo as a color only appears on Lloyd and Salem. Nearly Salem's entire design is indigo, and Lloyd's vest is actually in the indigo spectrum. No, Rambley is not indigo. His gray is in the magenta spectrum. I checked with a color picker. The only character with magenta on them is Salem. Similarly, they're the only 2 characters with purple in their design. In fact, the purple of Salem's potions is a brighter version of the purple in Rambley's eyes. Red appears only on Rambley and Lloyd and no one else. Orange is present across Lloyd, Finley, and Molly, but not Salem or Rambley. Rambley is the only character with absolutely no yellow in his design. Notably, the shade of orange used is actually yellow-orange. Yellow-orange is the opposite color to indigo. Its use also seems very deliberate, as it's used on Molly's neck feathers when her wing ones are yellow. Lloyd is almost entirely yellow-orange, with his mane being red-orange and red and yellow streaks, and Finley's head fins are partially yellow-orange as well. This yellow-orange ties all their designs together, and puts a noticeable separation from Rambley and Salem. This could mean that Salem and Rambley are, in fact, much later additions to the cast than the game has us believe. This, in addition to the fact that Salem and Rambley stand out as a skunk and raccoon among the more exotic macaw, lion, and sea serpent, is really interesting. I don't want to leave an extremely long email, but I do want to know your 2 cents on the use of color for the mascots and what it might mean, because there does seem to be something deliberate. Thank you for your email. This is something really interesting. I hadn't done that much delving into the Indigo Park lore. As much as I loved the demo and like Rambley as a character, there wasn't super much to like really make a lot of theories about with just chapter 1. Because like it is more of like, hey, here's our pitch to you guys that this is something worthwhile. And it was a really good pitch. That being said, clearly they are thinking about it. And I think your color analysis here is not misplaced. Is it intentional? Who can say? But you raise a good point on the fact that Rambley and Salem seem to be paired separately from Lloyd, Finley, and Molly. Not to mention, I think you raise an incredibly good point on the idea of Indigo being on the opposite color spectrum of yellow-orange. Yeah, it's something I hadn't thought about. I wonder if it's meaningful then that Lloyd has that old black and white plushie, and Rambley points out, like, why does Lloyd get one and I don't? That's really interesting, of Rambley being a late addition. Now, I will say, Rambley being a late addition in particular does seem strange to me, because Rambley's in the statue with Isaac at the beginning. So to me, that's like, well, Rambley was the first. What I could see this being is perhaps Lloyd, Finley, and Molly were later additions, and it started with Rambley and Salem. I could see that being the case, and then that way, the Lloyd plushie would kind of be a way to not cover up that they're later additions, but make them feel more established as characters. Whereas, like, we don't need one for Rambley, we all know Rambley. But, like, Lloyd, you know, he's totally from back then, quote unquote. It's also then notable that Salem has been kind of put into the spotlight, right? Salem's attraction in the train ride is broken. Salem is the antagonist in the arcade game. Not only that, Salem is changing the other animals in the arcade game, right? Like, Salem makes Molly evil, essentially. So it's like, does that have any relevance with the fact that we then fight a fleshy, organic Molly who is trying to kill us? It's interesting to think about. What is Salem involved in this, or is Salem set up as this kind of scapegoat? I don't know, but I think your color theory. I think your color theory is not misplaced. I was gonna say your color theory, but you know what I mean. It's something that's really interesting, and I think it's definitely something to keep in mind as more information comes out. That being said, I've got a mission for y'all. I don't know if it's already been solved, but there was a shop page put up for Indigo Park, and somebody found there is a hidden keypad on this that you can enter like a word into. I haven't solved it. I tried a couple like guesses, but there might be something. They did just update chapter 1. Maybe we'll play this on stream and try to figure this out. But I wouldn't doubt if whatever they've added in chapter 1 is the answer to this keypad. It's something that's really interesting to me, so definitely look into that. But thank you for your question. Moving on, Andy, he, him, while reading the week before, there's a part that mentioned Ralph's daughter likes to play Sega Genesis. Research showed that it was most popular around Christmas in 91, which would make it easy to connect FNAF 2 to 1992 if Coppelia got it as a Christmas gift. Would you consider that as some concrete evidence? So, I consider it a good supporting theory, like supporting evidence. But when something like the Sega Genesis gets name dropped in a book, as far as concrete evidence goes, the only thing that you can take that as like concrete without a doubt is true, is that this is taking place after the Sega Genesis was released, which was 1989 in the US. So all this really definitively tells us is FNAF 1 takes place after FNAF 2, which we were already pretty sure on. But as far as concrete evidence goes, that's where it ends. But you do raise a good point. I would say that is decent supporting evidence for a theory of like 92 or 93 for that matter. But I thought this was good to bring up to point out the difference, in my opinion, of concrete versus definitive evidence. I just realized, for those of you who definitely noticed, I'm recording this podcast in 2 chunks because I had to go do something, and I forgot to put my apron back on. So, and I didn't address that there was a pause. So for you guys, suddenly I was without apron, which is kind of funny. But I'll put it back on just to maintain some continuity. But that's funny. Anyway, yeah, I don't have too much to add to that theory. It's just something I wanted to bring up to kind of give a good example of like concrete evidence versus supporting evidence. But thank you for your question. Moving on, CA, they, them. I believe I noticed a pattern with the timeline that could potentially definitively disprove molten MCI. Forgive me if I get any of this incorrect. In the recordings from FNAF 3, we hear Ralph saying that the safe rooms were being sealed to hide Springtrap without anything taken out. This means that Purple Guy was already dead when Ralph was still alive and FNAF 1. The problem here is that the animatronics are still active during FNAF 1, which means they would have had to have been reassembled after they were dismantled in Follow Me. By that logic, if they were still there to be reassembled, they can't be in the sister location animatronics. We know those are the same animatronics and not reproductions because they are clearly still haunted in FNAF 1. In addition, Springtrap couldn't have put them in the funtimes after Freddy Fazbear's Pizza closes because the minigame shows he tried to disassemble them while he was still alive. P.S. Couldn't the boarded up window from Follow Me be left over from one of the many building remodels / hidden sections that are mentioned the week before? You raise a good point. I think this is probably one of the more often brought up points to disprove molten MCI. That being, the Springlock suits were sealed up in the back room from the FNAF 3 recordings. So like, huh? What I would assume is the case. Here's my explanation for that. Is it evidence-backed? No, but it's one of those assumptions that, like, for certain theories, you have to make them, right? In FNAF 1, we do not see the secret room. It is sealed up. And in Follow Me, the animatronics can't go into that sealed up secret room. In FNAF 3, they found an animatronic behind a false wall. The question is, how did they find that false wall? My thinking goes, it was already somewhat broken into. Because if it was a fully sealed off brick wall, how did they know there was a secret room behind it? Or did they go to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza and find this like somewhat broken into secret room? So my thinking goes with Follow Me in particular, is that Follow Me is taking place after FNAF 1, and William breaks into the secret room that he would know exists to get access to the Springlock suits, to get access to a safe place from the animatronics, and to slowly start taking them apart. I think that makes the most sense to me. That Follow Me is taking place after FNAF 1 closes and William breaks into that room. And then the whole question of like, okay, well then why is he still in there? I don't think he's sealed in there. I think he just can't get out yet, you know? Or it's a matter of maybe he broke into it in a way that he can fit in, but an animatronic can't fit out. But then when FNAF 3 starts, and that's why he's safe the whole time. He goes into this crack in the wall he's made. He's safe. The animatronics can't get through. And then when Phone Dude is looking for stuff to bring to Fazbear's Fright, he finds this crack in the wall, sneaks in, and finds Springtrap, breaks him out, brings him over. I think that's plausible. But you do raise a good point. If you don't believe molten MCI, this is a good piece of evidence to counter it. But I think there are ways to explain it away. And that then the explanation for the sealing of the back rooms, that's not MCI. That's one of the Springlock accidents that possibly killed a worker. Who knows, you know? But thank you for your question. Moving on, we've got Gary, they, them. What FNAF songs, fan-made or official, do you listen to tons? I don't listen to a lot of the official ones a lot, but there are a couple FNAF fan songs that, like, outside of just because of FNAF, just because they're genuinely really good songs, I listen to a lot. And the two that come to mind are Pizza the Action by Stupendium. I still think is the best FNAF song, I will say. I still am a firm believer in that. But I also just listen to Stupendium's catalog outside of, like, on YouTube. Like, they're on my Spotify playlist that I listen to personally. Like, I love Stupendium's work. But Pizza the Action, one of the best FNAF songs ever made. I think a second one that is my favorite is a newer one that I didn't notice for like a month or so, but I went and listened to it and I love it to death. Reflection by JT Music. It's presented on YouTube as a Springtrap song, but as you listen to it and watch the video, it's a Mimic song, as the Mimic is like putting on the character of Springtrap. And I think artistically, that song is really interesting. It's written in an uneven time signature, so it feels choppy and like it's trying to do something. And just the way that it's rapped and sang is so musically interesting to me. And it's that like industrial pop that I really like. So Reflection is really, really solid. I would say Pizza the Action and Reflection are the two FNAF songs I listen to the most. But that's just me. Thank you for your question. Moving on, Emily, she, her. Some of the motivations of the animatronics in FNAF 1, according to the week before, are that they want to escape the pizzeria and be free to go outside. Ennard, in the Molten MCI theory, would have the remnant from the MCI victims and wants to escape Sister Location Facility and be free to go outside. Does this show that it's the spirits themselves and not the Funtimes AI that have this motivation in Sister Location? I think that's a great connection. And it also talks to this, like, really depressing narrative that is popping up, right? Where by the time of FNAF 1, the missing child incident victims are so restless and so tired of being trapped in this pizzeria that they just want freedom. And they're broken apart, and they think they're finally free to rest, but suddenly they're melted into the funtime animatronics and once again are trapped without escape. No wonder they're so aggressive and desperate to get out in Sister Location. They finally had freedom, and they're back in the fucking building again. And then we get Sister Location where they turn into Ennard, and they get to taste that freedom, but it's fleeting. And then they turn into Molten Freddy and Scrap Baby. And what happens? They are once again captured and put into a pizzeria. By the time of FNAF 6, the missing child incident victims must be furious. And then to take it a step further, if you believe Molten Freddy's spirits end up in the Tangle from Security Breach, once again, they are trapped in this pizzeria, desperate to get out. No wonder the beginning of Ruin is them just getting the hell out. They've been trying to leave for like, by the time of Security Breach, they'd been trying to leave the pizzeria for like 50 years. They don't want to be there anymore. They're in their own purgatory. So it is this like very sad narrative that crops up. And the fact that we then get this like compelling narrative of these spirits trying to escape repeatedly, I think is good evidence for that. I think it's decent supporting evidence for Molten MCI in general. It's solid evidence, no, but it's a good thematic thing to play on when making timelines. But yeah, I think you're right, Emily. Thank you for your question. Moving on to Kurio Yukin, he, she, they. Fresh off the hype, and this is something I wanted to bring up, so I'm glad you mentioned it. Fresh off the Hyperdroid theory, something stuck out to me in the week before. At the beginning of night 6, sorry, I don't have the page number, I have the ebook, not physical, Ralph refers to a friend of his in the maintenance department as Dave. Do you think it's a narrative parallel to the Silver Eyes, or either Mike or William are still working at Freddy's at this point in time under the guise of Dave, or just a random guy? I was talking about it in DMs with, I think, Demuted. I was talking about it to somebody. That like the fact if Crying Child's name is truly Dave, and we have Dave Miller from the Silver Eyes as a William pen name, like a fake name essentially. And then we have a guy in the week before named Dave who works in maintenance, who Ralph trusts to know how to repair the animatronics. To me, that's like, oh shit. Is he calling William? Not to mention, Dave is like a very gruff and weird guy, according to Ralph, right? Like, he's like, oh, he's always kind of mean or whatever. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was something like that. That I'm like, is this William? Is William still like trying to work at these places to see what's going on and tweak with the animatronics? I think that's really worthwhile to look into. Because again, who would be the trusted guy to repair the animatronics other than William Afton, who has gone by Dave in the past and maybe does again? It's something really interesting, I think. So you were right to call that out, and thank you for your question. I'm kind of speeding through these, but I grabbed a lot. And then moving on to the last one I grabbed from Danil, they, them. I'd like to hear your thoughts about how in the VIP novel, Freddy and Roxy sympathize to Devon. Are they in save mode? Maybe they're not infected by the mimics somehow. Also, it's only Freddy and Roxy that seem friendly, if I'm not mistaken. Monty's just like in the games, and Chica says to go and meet VI Pig at the entrance. I would say you're a little mistaken, because like Monty is like chasing you, but as to my knowledge, he doesn't kill you in Monty Maze. If you get caught, he just picks you up, carries you out, and says you lost. Unless there's an ending I missed that I forgot about, because there is a lot of like different branching paths in the Monty Maze. But yeah, it is worth noting that Freddy and Roxy are like standoffish about VIP. And it's like, oh yeah, good luck with that thing. I do wonder if the Mimic program has not infected Freddy or Roxy at this point. If it wasn't like an all at once thing, but a slowly creeping through the Pizzaplex thing. I could buy that. I think that does make a lot of sense. The way, something about VIP that I do need to like go back and look more into. Everybody at the Pizzaplex seems in on it, right? Like a couple of the workers are like, oh, you're Devon, right? And like are very knowledgeable of it. All the animatronics are like, oh, you're with VIP, huh? Like everybody seems in on it in a really strange way, which is something that I think warrants like a full video kind of delving into. It kind of got lost in all the FNAF week hype. I don't know when I'll get to it, but I think I will get to that eventually. But thank you for your question. It is something that is worth pointing out and interesting. So I'm glad you brought it up. But I kind of sped around a couple of those, but we've been doing this for like 30 minutes. That's questions. If you want your questions talked about on the podcast, you can send them into Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast at gmail.com. Link is in the description to copy and paste, because it's pain to type out. But until next time, thank you for watching the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. The pizza abilities are endless. We hope to enjoy your future patronage. Bye-bye for now.